We try different wines.
What's your favorite wine? Red or white? Hold on, first.
Red.
Okay, all right.
I'm sophisticated.
A part of me was just like, y'all, we've been great. You're just now figuring it out, but we've been great. That's who we are. It's in our DNA.
To like do my Colossus Deadpool like impersonation, 1 or 2 moments, right? It's.
And I'm sitting here in my head going, I wonder if I can somehow sniff the traffic going from the armband. It's got to be talking to an API or something.
To the next cocktail, to the next conversation.
Hey, good morning, C3 Squad. Welcome back to another episode of the C3 podcast, Cocktails, Culture, and Conversations. I'm one of your hosts, Maine Terry, and I have with me today Miss Laurel Berryman.
Where's the clapping? Come on,
okay.
clap. It's a clap.
We'll get to the clapping.
No, I want it live. I want it live. I don't want no virtual clapping. No.
She don't want virtual clapping, man. Well, we'll get to the reason to clap in a minute here. But first, let me introduce our third co-host, Mr. David Lee. How you doing today, sir?
Y'all know what it is.
Yeah.
I'm all right, man. I'm all right.
Well, we actually both know what it is because the fans, they came out last week. We got photos, we got screenshots, we got videos. The fans came out, they have spoken, and they have only temporarily dubbed Laurel as their favorite co-host. So there's a reason to clap, and we need to go ahead and just give Laurel her flowers. So congratulations.
Come on, David.
The fans have spoken. So this is gonna be a week-to-week thing because you ain't keeping the title.
All right, I got high hopes for you.
All right. Well, before we get started, I always like to do a little bit of housekeeping just so you guys know where to find us, how to look us up, how to communicate and interact. So as always, you can find us on the Ebony Ascent platform at www.ebonyascent.com. You can find this podcast and some of our other podcasts on the website. You can also find us on the social medias, On the Corner on TikTok. So it's at On the Corner Media Group on TikTok. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube at Ebony Ascent. You can find us on Instagram at Ebony Ascent, and you can find us on Twitter at Ascent Ebony David.
No, it's Ebony Ascent.
We got it?
I got it.
Yes. I saw you was waiting. You was waiting to correct me, so I love it. So we are at Ebony Ascent on all the socials now.
On all the socials, man.
Yes, finally. So you can find us at Ebony Ascent on Twitter as well. So today we're bringing you a very, very important and a very, very deep topic today. And it dates back to the 1860s, shortly after the emancipation and the abolishment of slavery. So today we're going to be talking about Jim Crow and the Jim Crow era laws and how those still to this day have an impact on the African-American community. And I know you guys have kind of been having a kind of a passionate discussion about it even before we started recording. So really, David, I wanted to kick it over to you, man, because I know you kind of had a little bit of insight that you wanted to bring up. And I wanted you to kind of kick it off because I like how you introduced the discussion earlier.
Okay. Sorry, I was setting up Do Not Disturb before everybody starts texting me. Yeah, so, I mean, the discussion earlier was like aimed at like the second part of this, which is a whole other topic that we'll get into. But specifically, when you look at Jim Crow, it's been documented and it's on record that Jim Crow was an extension of the systemic racism that white people wanted to put to keep Black people out, just period, right? The states in the South were the worst, Mississippi being the absolute worst, where it was pretty much, it was almost like they wanted to institutionalize the right to keep us in a certain area and almost a right to terrorize us, right? I mean, it was vindictive in the way that a lot of the things were set up, and it was almost reading it and going back and looking at the statutes that were put in place, the comments from the representatives at that time, it was almost in certain ways like revenge for the emancipation in the first place, right? So, and for the laws that came out of that, it wasn't any kind of set laws. It was just wide ranging. Basically, the general concept is anything that keeps us from them, right? So, you will work here. They would set your wages. They would set where you could live. They would set your ability to get land, how much of land you could keep, what you sold your crops for, right? Because even though, Black people were now free, they had to work in this system, in this economy that was not for them, right? So the person that you bought your tools from to work your land and the person that you sold your crops to were all the same person, and they didn't fucking like you at all, right? They didn't want anything. They didn't want you to have like the same freedoms, the levels that you had. And while there were cases where there were Black families that owned land, that had farms and mules and all these things, and they were, I will say, thriving relatively, right? They were thriving. They could feed their families, they could take care of themselves. They were starting to, try and get access to that education. The Jim Crow laws that were put in place also started to come for them too, because there was only so much they could isolate themselves until they had to start, then being a part of the economy and system to where these laws were created for them not to. And it's a tough read to go back and look at it, to see the level of, the level of hatred that was put into laws, and to see the effect that it had. And, for me, like I've always been big on history. Like, you have to understand the context of things. It could just be my engineer's background, my mind, the way it works. Like, I think if I understand like the history of something, the context of where something fits, then it allows me to understand everything around it and how to manipulate this object, right? Engineers, we usually want to take things apart. That's just what we do, right? Everything I look at, to me, is a system and something that can be taken apart. So if I understand everything else around it, I know how to take it apart and manipulate it to do what I want it to do. And I think it's the same thing when you look at, the history of where we come with Jim Crow, what that means. And then when you start to look at some of the laws and things that are being done today, right, you start to get that really eerily familiar taste to it. When you look at it, it's like, hey, this looks like something that's been done before. Again, where history matters. If you understand, you can see that and start to go from there. So yeah, that would be my opening statement to it. I think it's one of these things that we have to understand and realize that this wasn't ancient history, right? This wasn't, centuries ago, right? This is stuff that still happened, within a generation, right? I have a parent who lived through this. Some of us have grandparents that lived through this. So this isn't something that it's like, oh, this was so long ago. No, it was close. It was close enough to touch. You can find somebody in your community, in your immediate family, I guarantee you, that can tell you what this was like from memory. So yeah, that's my opening statement.
Yeah, and Laurel, I know you're very passionate about upward mobility for a Black community and equal rights for Black people and equal treatment under the law for Black people. So what are your opinions on this topic?
Right. Thanks, Maine. So I agree with a lot of what David said about equality, right? I think historically, because we have a nation that was birthed in genocide, right? The blood of indigenous people, their land was taken from them. And then when they couldn't enslave the indigenous people on this land, because historically what we've been taught is that they couldn't tell them apart and different things like that, they started to take part in the transatlantic slave trade, right? And steal our ancestors and bring them here. And so from what we know, what history tells us is that any time equality is brought up, the topic, the concept, the idea, the definition in the midst of privileged people, they take that as a slight to their privilege. It's a threat to their privilege. And our community, African Americans, we have always been resilient in the face of oppression. That's why we're still here, right? Make no mistake, our ancestors, we're here because we have an ancestor or ancestors who survived a slave ship, okay? So we're not the ones to play with. And so we've made that clear throughout American history. And that's why we always see anytime African Americans as a community, we have some sort of advancements for ourselves, you see that great pushback. And that's exactly what Jim Crow was, right? So after the Emancipation Proclamation was enacted and the Civil War ended. You had, African-American people now who got their rights, right? After we had the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th Amendment, which abolished chattel slavery. The 14th Amendment gave equal citizenship rights for African-Americans. And the 15th gave African-American men the right to vote. Black folks started coming out in droves, right? Owning property, different things like that, right? Becoming teachers, joining Congress, becoming senators, mayors, all of that kind of a thing. And then you had an incident, which we won't talk about too much because it's a little, I don't want to get into the legal jargon or anything like that, but Plessy v. Ferguson, who Homer Plessy was his name, and he basically had a case that he took all the way to the Supreme Court, where he was trying to take a train car to where he was trying to go, and the train cars were segregated. And at the time, segregation was technically illegal, right? It would have infringed on his 14th Amendment rights, right? I'm a citizen, I should be able to sit in this car or that car, right? He did identify as a Black man, but he was extremely passing. So he sat in a white car, and many accounts say that he did it as a form of protest, right? Because he was white passing, but when the conductor asked, which they did commonly, "Are you a Negro?" He said yes. And they tried to, escort him off, and he wouldn't go off, right? Then they tried to find him after that. And anyway, he ended up going to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, after time, affirmed basically that segregation was legal. And that really set the stage for Jim Crow. So that really said, now to all these white supremacists, you have the law on your side. So do whatever you need to do to keep these Negroes in a constant state of oppression. Go ahead and do it, right? So then you had poll taxes that were put in place, where now African Americans who owned all of this land, they can't afford the poll tax, right? Because they're barely getting paid anything in the first place. Think about it, in the early 21st century, late 20th century, $25, $50, different things like that. How can a poor Black community afford those kind of poll taxes? Even white families probably weren't able to afford that, right? Poll taxes, you had literacy tests, keeping individuals out of the voting booths and different things like that. And the biggest thing that we saw, which is extremely relevant today, as well as the others, right, was we're still getting attacked in voting and different things like that, but was the influx of violence. So you had the KKK kind of have this rebirth and come about to really defend the white Southern dream, right? Where you see think about Gone with the Wind, right? That lifestyle that they valued so much. And they knew exactly what African-American people needed to be, where their station had to be in order for them to continue to live that lifestyle. And so you had an influx of violence. There's statistics that state, and I'm not sure if they've changed from the ones that I've read, but in the late 20th century and early 21st century, when Jim Crow was put into practice, again, and this is throughout the United States, I just want to put that out there for individuals. We talk about it mostly from the context of the South, like David said, Mississippi, which was has a really, really horrible reputation for the amount of lynchings and different things that went on there with racial violence. But the same things were happening in Boston, right? The same things were happening in New York, in California. People were being, we had the Great Migration, right? Where literally African-American people were leaving the South and and the Midwest areas to kind of flee upwards to get away from it as much as they could, right? But the statistics show that at least 2 African-American people a week were being lynched in this country over the span of 10 years. Think about that. Think about if you've ever seen a lot of us have seen those pictures. And if you watch a documentary, I dare to say that they're in history books, but it could be so depending on where you go to school. But pictures of African-American people hanging from trees, right? Well, those people in the pictures you see, right, smiling, taking, like, if they had cell phones, they would be taking selfies with a mangled dead body, right? People were selling postcards. People were taking pieces of their skin and bringing it home, making lampshades and bookends and different things like that from these broken, mangled, murdered Black bodies, okay? So Jim Crow was an extremely dangerous thing. And really it lasted for half a century until Brown v. Board came about in the 1960s, right? After a whole, slew of movement that we did in the throughout the civil rights movement, which legally ended segregation, right? It said that separate but equal, that was never a thing because they were never equal, right? And it ended that in schools. But you still had remnants of Jim Crow, right? Because with Jim Crow, people were still, as I stated before, right, getting their voter rights infringed upon. Black people were not allowed to legally marry outside of their race in other states. Now places in the North and different places like that, Midwest, the West allowed things like that, but predominantly in the South, interracial marriage was a major no-go, right? So that didn't change with Brown v. Board, that changed, with Loving v. Virginia, right? So you have all of these different remnants of Jim Crow that just these puzzle pieces that certain ones were kind of taken off, but the puzzle's still there. There's still pieces, and we still see pieces of it to this day. And I just wanted to mention, because I'm sure you two have thought about it, but as we listen to the news with everything that's going on right now with the disgraced former president and January 6th and the happenings of that day, I'll never forget. I was working from home that day, and I saw what was happening on my TV, right? Like the news, whatever, breaking news. Yeah, and I'm looking at it, and I was just like, okay, right. And not to minimize it, or not that I thought it was funny, but for those of us who have been paying attention, especially those of us in the African American community, this kind of violence, when white people aren't getting their way, when white people feel as though communities of color, QIA plus groups, people who are non-white, cisgender, heterosexual people are coming to the forefront, and they're taking what they want for themselves. That's not to say they're taking anything away from white people, but that's how white people feel, as I stated, right? Equality, equity means that, you have to take some of my privilege. And that's not necessarily what it is, right? And we can discuss that more in detail. But, we had the Arkansas sharecropper massacre, where, the government allowed military officials to come in and literally just slaughter Black people, right? Slaughter Black people. Black Wall Street, the burning of Black Wall Street. Like, we've seen this kind of violence before, when white people get their panties all in a bunch and they want to make a big mess and kill a bunch of people and try to take back what they believe is theirs, right? Protecting their whiteness. And so I wonder what both of your thoughts are on that when we kind of get into how Jim Crow still exists today. In many ways, there's still remnants of it that exist within the law, but even outside of that, with people's mindsets, right? And this idea of whiteness and what that means. What are your thoughts, Maine?
See, I like that, how you kind of went through the history of it, because as Dave stated, we've only been maybe a generation, maybe 2 generations deep since these Jim Crow laws were even enacted. And if you look at the timeline of when all of this happened, so the emancipation was 1863. That's when slavery was officially abolished. And in 1865 is when the southern states started kind of championing these Jim Crow laws, these Jim Crow statutes against specifically Black people and assisting Black people. So not just targeting Black people, but targeting white people who, decided that, okay, we can treat other people as human beings. They were targeted in these laws as well. And as you alluded to earlier, even with marriage, like white people are forbidden by the government to even marry Black people. So even though the laws were, meant to stifle Black progressivism and Black upward mobility, if you were assisting Black people, you were a target of these laws as well. And the Jim Crow laws are what directly led to the formation of the KKK, because the KKK was basically, it started off as kind of a gentleman's club for former Confederate soldiers. And so, like you said, they were banding together to get back their whiteness, get back their rights, get back what they believed that they deserved because they stole it first. And so that's a huge portion of what even started the KKK. Was they were emboldened by these Jim Crow era laws and Plessy versus Ferguson decision at the Supreme Court. And these guys, which honestly are still active today, the year 2020, there are KKK rallies and protests in the streets of Chicago, Illinois, in the streets of Raleigh, North Carolina, in the streets of Charlotte, North Carolina. Like, they are still completely active, still vocal, still publicly and loudly endorsing certain disgraced presidents, as you put it, and championing those types of ideology. And when the Jim Crow style laws were federally abolished, we're talking maybe 1960. So yeah, some of our parents, definitely grandparents, were alive when desegregation policies started taking place, and we started desegregating, train cars, desegregating restaurants. My mother was going to elementary school in North Carolina when the schools were desegregated. And so I'm sitting down having discussions with my mom over these policies that directly impacted her and her education and her upbringing, and how she viewed honestly, white supremacy in the South because she lived it. So we're definitely not talking history here. We're talking, I mean, if we're saying history is very modern history, it's been within the last 65, 70 years. Like everyone watching this podcast and having these discussions today knows someone who lived and dealt with Jim Crow era laws and the segregation, particularly in the South, but like you said, all over the nation. And so, yeah, I know that. So there's probably 130, 140 national Black massacres. And I think that's a whole other discussion that we can get into. But I definitely still see the effects and see the remnants, and seeing especially Southern white people trying to cling to this history of violence, this history of inequality, and this history of hatred, down to the point where I lived in Virginia. I actually worked in DC, and during the January 6th insurrection, I'm looking out my window at work and I'm seeing the effects of this happening. So we are not removed from this type of ideology in the country. And so, yeah, I definitely want to see what you guys think about, like, how going forward and how currently we have to deal with and we have to live with these laws that still impact us to this day.
Yeah, I think so. If you've been watching the podcast the last couple episodes, right, you're gonna kind of see a theme, and you see this thread going all the way through, right? The reason why even today we still see remnants of the Jim Crow laws is because they weren't necessarily laws, right? So they were protected when Plessy versus Ferguson, and it became okay, separate but equal. So that gave people like, oh shit, like we good, we can go away with this, right? And how they were implemented, they became like statutes and things like housing, right? Covenants, right? It became this thing where it's like it's written into at the town level, at the community level, right? Now at the state level. Certain areas, I'll bring up Mississippi because Mississippi was so bad, like they wrote it into their constitution. So there was actually laws that you could go change, right? But it's these, you know, kind of hitting things, practices, right? Redlining for how we're going to create certain stuff for the communities and put resources. So it's these things that are done in that aspect where they aren't necessarily things that we can look at and point to and go, okay, let's go change that, right? Let's go, you know, figure out what this is. And as we get into society now, there was an example from the Mississippi Constitution where it was very explicit that the phrase was, this is being done to keep niggers out, right? And so they changed that from niggers and said, okay, let's be a little bit more politically correct. And we'll say to uphold the intelligence and integrity of our, you know, whatever, of their little constitution or whatever. So they hide it between words and they create different, you know, their statutes and laws now that still have the same effect. And for me, looking at it is it's always why I've been an advocate of, and I talked about this on the last podcast, like I read everything, right? Like read everything. Like one of the biggest weapons we have is our ability to look at something and read and understand and call it out, right? It's not, we're nowhere near in the perfect system, but we have the ability to use that system when needed. But specifically thing is we can't allow ignorance to stop us, right? And that just truly becomes when we don't even know. And I'm saying ignorance in the truest of words, like we don't even know what's going on around us, right? We've got to be active. We've got to be paying attention to things that are getting passed in our communities. Like I'm not saying you got to, you know, turn around today and decide I'm going to become president of the United States, but you can just get active where you live in your own community. Pay attention to whatever. Like start with your freaking HOA policies because you probably have one. If you're renting, start with whatever's in your rental agreement. Like that's where this stuff lives and exists today, right? It's written into those things. And the thing that does come out is like when it is written, when it is in a contract or something that you sign, now it's a tangible item that I can change, that I can fight against, that I can start to show cases where, okay, this is wrong, or what's this term mean, or I don't like this, right? And that's, you know, to me, when I look at the biggest thing and why, you know, it's so important we pay attention to what is getting passed, what laws, what bills, what things are getting done. Because if we don't pay attention to the verbiage and what they're trying to do, because it's no longer overt, right? I remember Trevor Noah, right? Somebody asked him, if you don't know who Trevor Noah is, he's South African. He's host of the Daily Show now. I don't really know if he's considered a comedian anymore. I mean, I guess because he's the host of the Daily Show. And if you haven't read his book, it's really good. Born a Crime. But on the Daily Show, somebody asked him like, "Hey, like, do you think it's which one do you think is better, South Africa or here as far as like the racism?" I don't know exactly how they worded it, but basically asking him to compare the two. And he was like, at least in South Africa, right? Apartheid, like you knew. Like it was overt, like, right? It was very spelled out. He goes, so that's something that's an enemy that I could fight against, right? Like I knew what I needed to get rid of and how to go against it. He's like, over here in America, it's like, you don't know. Like, I'd rather you call me, if you're gonna call me a nigger to my face. Now I know exactly who you are, what you believe in, right? And so I know how to react to that versus not when it's like, oh, but I don't see color, or you're not one of them. Like all these little like hidden innuendos of how they still try and say and convert and hide things. He goes that he believed that was worse, right? Because you just, at least in South Africa, you knew what you were getting into when you walked out into the street. Like you knew, right? So I can prepare for that. Right here, it's like, how do you know? Right? How do you know? You can just walk down the street. You don't know what's going on because it's so converted. And I thought, especially hearing from him, for somebody who grew up in that, right? Like literally the title of his book is Born a Crime, because in South Africa, it was illegal for him to be born because a white man and period, white and blacks couldn't be married, couldn't have kids, right? That was part of apartheid. And yet he was, right? And so just his existence, right? And him growing up through that. So to hear somebody say that, and now he's here, he's like, and again, this is not saying that he preferred it. No, he said that he wanted, but he knew what the enemy was, right? You know where to fight, you know where to go against. And so those are the things when I look at today is like, we got to know who that enemy is. And the only way we do that is we got to pay attention. We got to look at things that are getting passed. We got to read the things that they're trying, that they put into place and understand it. And you're going to see it like in your communities, you're going to see it in your school system. You're going to see all this area. It still does exist. And right now, a lot of it is hidden by finance. Right? Like it's literally hidden by finance. They redline now based on like, investments that they're going to put into the community, where organizations are going to come in. If a major brand like a Toyota or a Pepsi or a Coke is going to come in and build a plant and do these things, that's where money is going. So they're redline around that, right? they're not gonna invest in and put organizations in areas where they think the property value isn't going to be there, right? Where you see a lot of minorities, where you see a lot of less built up houses. Like it's they hide it in financial talk. And so it's these things why part of the reason why this platform exists, and part of the reason why the things that we put out of there is because we have to have these conversations and be aware and being involved and look at, like, we have access to we have access to find anything we want on the internet, like literally. Now granted, that's both good and bad because there's also a lot of disinformation, but the point is we have access to it, right? And so that's a start. So for me, it's about making sure that we are paying attention. We are bringing these things to light. We are looking at it and making sure that we see it, we can start to move against it. We have to bring light to who the enemy is, because if it's always covert, like we never know, right? And all of a sudden we wake up and things are gone, right? It's one small step at a time, and all of a sudden, like, nothing's there. Right, the things that we feel like we take for granted are taken away from us because we're not seeing the way they're moving. So, I mean, I take a hard stance on that, right? Like, it's just we gotta pay attention, right? I honestly say it's there's no excuse not to, right? I get it. There's a lot of shit that's going on. We can't know everything, but you can start with the stuff that's around you, right? So.
And make no mistake, there's a reason why the GOP is so intent on bringing things back to states' rights. Like they don't want that federal national level oversight on these practices. They want to be able to hide this stuff in their state constitutions, right, in their state statutes, in their educational programs, because there was a time during Jim Crow where schools were segregated, white schools and black schools. But the white schools would get better resources, more informative textbooks, better teachers than the black schools would get. So even the ignorance of these policies and these statutes originally were by design. To your point, David, like, of course, we have almost everyone from the age 10 and up walks around with a device that has all this knowledge that's available to you. But with all that knowledge is a lot of misinformation and disinformation and propaganda and things that are telling you, falsely leading you down these rabbit holes. So one of the things as a community and as a culture that we need to get better at is teaching our kids how to research, how to actually sift through and figure out what's fact and what's opinion, what's propaganda, and what actually involves critical thought and critical thinking. And to that effect, there's states that are even trying to get rid of critical thinking from their education. And they're trying to whitewash as much of the history as they can because they know that knowledge and intelligence is powerful. And the minute that we start showing that we are intelligent and we start gaining power, we start gaining property, we start gaining finances, businesses, and we start thriving, they can't handle it. So yeah, I know me and David kind of hijacked a lot of the discussion here, but yeah, it's still going on to this day. And I think we need to talk about like just how we need to prepare and how we need to prep our future generations on dealing with this and wading through these waters and navigating through this system that honestly is designed to hold us down, a system that's designed to keep a boot on our necks at all times.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll get Laurel's thoughts and we'll continue the conversation. So see y'all in a second.
Hey, everybody, thanks for listening. Don't forget to tune in and head over to ebonyascent.com and check out all the great content. It has been a busy summer for us over here at Ebony Ascent. Recently, just this month of September, we dropped the All Mixed Up podcast. Go ahead and go over to ebonyascent.com, check that out. It is also streaming on all your podcast platforms. And that's brought to us by hosts Erica Holmes and Jeremy Holmes as they talk about what it's like being in an interracial relationship here in America and some of the things that the challenges they've had and raising a mixed family. Of course, we also have the Moneyish blog. You can get all tips about money, things of that nature that we are breaking down for you on Ebony Ascent. Of course, we have Veterans of the Game podcast. You can't forget about that. It's your boy, your host, Chief Terry, interviewing veterans, talking about what life has been like in the Army and coming out of the Army, but really just being that military veteran and what some of the mindset is. And of course, we want to talk about mindset, open door conversations. This is our conversation with Fatima and Renata as they are breaking down all different topics when it comes to mental health. Look, we got you covered over at ebonyascent.com. So we got everything that you want. We got the blogs. We got the podcast. You can go to ebonyascent.com, listen to all the podcasts. You can check out all the streaming platforms. We're talking about Apple Podcasts, Spotify, your neighbor's favorite podcast platform, whatever it is. We got you. We are there. Make sure to check out all the great content. And of course, don't forget to log in and subscribe. Sign up to Ebony Ascent so you can be locked in on all this content. You can get emails for the newsletters. You know what it is. We're here for y'all. Let's get y'all back to the pod.
All right, everybody, welcome back. We're going to continue the conversation. And so, Laurel, I wanted to pass this off to you and ask you this. Like, what are some of the things, today that we're seeing that are have been passed that are trying to kind of like modernize some of these Jim Crow laws, right? Because to all of our points, right, this stuff still goes on today, and it's not just kind of hidden. It's some of it's kind of overt.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's over. And I think as both of you really articulated very well, Jim Crow laws were not necessarily laws on the books, right? It was more of a culture that was embedded, right? So if the federal government with Plessy v. Ferguson was saying, all right, go ahead, we're saying segregation is actually legal, right? Then the South took that, and the North and different places where it was highly racist, right? They took that as their green light to now let's do what we need to do to keep these folks oppressed. And so it became this culture, right? Where when we talk about Emmett Till, right? There was no law that, and he didn't, but there was no law that you can't catcall somebody. That wasn't a law, but it was, well, when you're here in this part of the country, you better know that if you're a Black person and you're walking on the same sidewalk as a white woman, even if you look at her, catcall her, whatever the case may be, you better know that we'll get you, meaning we'll kill you or we'll come for your family in the middle of the night, and all of you. So just know that. Right. So it was this culture that was created in the North, as David really expressed to all of us was, the racial covenants and redlining and homeowners associations, as we discussed in a previous episode of C3, right? Where again, it's not overtly saying we don't want Black folks in our neighborhoods, but if you really read the fine print, it'll say something, it'll have something, and a lot of them still exist to this day, right? Where people now, Black folks are going and buying homes and they're reading, they're finding these racial covenants that were put in place when the homes were built in the 40s or the 30s. And it's saying, no Black person may live on this property unless they're in the capacity of a domestic servant or something like that, right? And you're like, whoa. So a lot of these things are still on the books, although they're not cemented into the law. However, those things have really been able to take over our laws and our institutions, as when we talk about voting, as Black folks have been kept out of the booths, as people who are running for office. We can talk about Stacey Abrams, right? Stacey Abrams would create an amazing change in the state of Georgia and for the nation in and of itself. However, Stacey Abrams had an election stolen from her, and they managed to do it legally, and they managed to protect the people who did all of that, right? And so in that way, when you still have all of these white people who have all of these racist ideologies about what this country should be based on what they think the forefathers thought, which was African Americans need to be in a place of, perpetual servitude or slavery, that's exactly what they're going to continue to do in terms of the laws that they pass and the things that they protect. I think a great recent example of that right now that we see a lot of is police brutality. Is police brutality. What is that thing that happens for any of us when we drive by a cop on the highway, or if we see the lights flashing behind us, or something that we have to be something that we're not. We have to shape up really quick, have everything together, move very slowly, put your hands up, move, right? What is that piece, right? I would argue that in and of itself is a remnant of Jim Crow, right? Of this Black people, you need to stay in this place or else you will die. And that's what we're seeing, right? African-American people who are just standing up for themselves, saying, well, I got pulled over for a busted taillight, right? Boom, Philando Castile, dead. Right? Like, and the list goes on and on and on. Breonna Taylor sleeping in her house. These folks broke into her house. What? So I would argue that is really one of the biggest pieces of Jim Crow that we still see to this day, in terms of it being something that's embedded in the culture, that if you are a Black American, you need to know your place, or else this is what will happen to you. And make no mistake, we have the law. So you can try to run for office and do all that. That's cute. We'll let you get on TV every now and then. I'll see you on Joy Reid on, Monday night. But guess what? You're not going to be the governor, though. Because we'll stop that, because we have the law on our side. Because the people like us, right, when we talk about KKK, a lot of people would like to think, based off of the histories that we're taught, is it's like, Jeb sitting on the porch with one tooth and a straw hat. It was like, no, the KKK members were your governors. They were your police officers. They were the people who you would perceive to be those who are supposed to, make this place a better place to live for you and protect you. Those were the people that were causing the most harm to African Americans behind their little hoods. And that still exists to this day. Make no mistake about that.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up the police, because the invention of a state and a local police department was rooted in slavery ownership. The police were invented in South Carolina specifically to recover slaves who were attempting to escape, personal ownership. And so there are a lot of embedded practices and policies in police forces that, maybe the police officers themselves are not racist or are not remnants of the KKK or remnants of slave ownership. However, the policies and the culture behind the police force is very much rooted in slave ownership and slavery. So I'm glad that you kind of brought that up. And I think one of the things when people try to, come to you and say, hey, racism is dead, the slave era is, we got to think about, all right, so who are, let's say the Civil Rights Act and slavery and all that stuff was kind of put in place in the 1960s. So before the mid 1960s, segregation was very much illegal. Racism was very much overt and in your face. And so now we're looking at who are our judges, who are our district attorneys, who are the lawyers who own practices in many of the major cities, especially in the South, who are corporation owners, who are these billionaires and multimillionaires who are owning, sports teams, who are owning restaurant franchises. All of these people are, cisgendered, old white dudes who were in their early teens, their 20s, in college, in these segregated colleges back in the 1960s. And now these are the people who are running our government officials, our congressmen, our, representatives. That's who these people are to this day. Anyone in Congress, anyone in, your state legislation, anyone who is a business owner, they were alive. And many of them are thriving now because of the policies, the Jim Crow practices that were taking place when they were in their 20s, their 30s, their teens, and they were in their formative years, and they're coming up in this country. So a lot of these people who are in charge of many aspects of our lives today are in positions of power because they directly benefited. And sometimes them or their parents directly supported segregation, and they directly supported, racism and racist practice, and keeping, cultures separate, and the belief of white nationalism and white supremacy is very prevalent in the people who are leading our country and leading our businesses to this day. And so, even if they don't directly feel that they are racist, and that they don't feel that they are benefiting from these aspects of racism and white supremacy, they grew up in a time where it was legal and it was normal and it was natural. And it's very, very hard when you've learned something for 30, 40 years of your life, sometimes 50, 60 years, depending on how old some of these people are, of your life, to just get rid of that notion, to get rid of that ideology is very difficult. And so they've gotten very good at being able to smile in your face, being able to just tweak verbiage enough so that they can say, hey, no, I'm not like that. I don't feel this way on paper, but they still have these things in the back of their minds. And this is something that we as a culture have to navigate and have to deal with every day. And I think that we need to be able to vocalize that through things like critical race theory training and African-American history and African-American studies. And we need to be able to articulate this to our non-African-American counterparts in business, in politics, in society, so that we can start, climbing that rung, that ladder of success and upward mobility in America.
I mean, it's easy to win a race when you're the only one in it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's at the root of it. It just comes down to that, right? Like, if I don't have any competition, I'm in a business and there's no competition, and I own everything that's there, then that continues to prosper. But to me, then it goes back to the points like you gotta get in the we have to get in the race, right? As stacked it is against it, because here's the thing: if you want to look at it and say, all right, well, it's completely stacked against us, we can't, it's this, that, or whatever, then what? Like, right? Like, if you want to, if we're gonna sit and go, well, all this stuff is against us, and they're just okay, cool, but that's the card, that's the challenge, that's what's in front of you. So you can either pick up and run, or you can sit, or I don't know what, just not exist, or you can leave. That's a very real, like, yo, I remember when Belly came out, showing age, right? And like the whole part of it was like, yo, Nas's character was like, yo, let's just go. Like, why? I mean, that is a very real possibility and an answer. Like, why stay? We can just go to Africa, or go wherever you want. You can leave. Because it's not like,
why stay? Because we built this country, right? Like, for most people, it's why stay because my ancestors toiled on this land, and I am an American just as well as anybody else, despite their racial identity, right? But my question to you, David, and this is kind of continuing from when we were discussing the Constitution, so I'll ask you, what do you suggest when we have, for example, Stacey Abrams, right? We had in recent years one of the most diverse in terms of representation for BIPOC women in Congress and in the Senate and so on and so forth. We're out here doing the work, and we're getting in, but you still have oppression happening, right? You still have an uptick of police brutality and different things like that. So now what? Right? Because we are doing it. We've been doing it, trying to get into office and different things like that. But when we talk about it, like I said, with the those different, race riots that have happened that I believe are, comparable to what happened in January 6th, although it didn't take place in in the Capitol, but like the Wilmington massacre, right? Which was, you have a community of African American people who are leading themselves. They're writing their own papers. They had their own money and they were taking care of each other. And you have people coming in and destroying that through violence. Right? Violence, running them out, lynching them, burning their homes and their towns down. How do we recover from that, from centuries of that? Right? How do you run for governor, or how do you get into politics at all to make the change that you believe, right? If Black folks, if there was more of us up there representing, then we could make this change happen a lot more quickly. How do we do that when you have these rich white people like the Koch brothers and so on and so forth? They're not funding Black women who have a Black agenda. Right? Who want to talk about reparations and who want to talk about defunding the police or police reform and different things like that. These people who control our political realm, they're not trying to hear any of that. So then now what? What else are we supposed to do?
There's nothing else. We keep doing the same thing. We keep doing what Malcolm started, what Martin started, what John Lewis stood for, what Barack did. Like, we keep going. What Stacey is doing right now. Are we going to win every single one? No, because the odds are stacked against us. I was like, so is it going to be easy? No. Like, are they going to come back at us? Yes. Are we going to take losses? Yes. Are they going to come and try and burn down our towns? Yes. Like, I don't know. I mean, like, that's the shit that I'm like, what do we want to say? That, we're going to get a couple of wins.
So what's your suggestion? No. So if you know that they're going to continue to do the same thing, what do we do then? Fight back? Are you
fucking going? We keep going, and we go get more, and we come back. It's either that or then leave, right? Like, I'm not saying the choices are the best choices. I'm looking at what the reality of the world is, right? And so it's like, is it hard? Yes. You think Malcolm liked it? You think Malcolm didn't wake up every day and go, shit, right? Like, I'm literally trying to help. I'm watching my people get slaughtered. I'm watching them do this to us. And so you think he didn't want to get up and talk about it? You think he wants to be like, man, just forget it, man. This is not going anywhere. You don't think Martin got tired and was like, it's not going anywhere? You don't think John Lewis got tired and was like, I can't keep marching. I can't keep watching this. But if they didn't, we wouldn't even be here now. So this is not, I look at this and why I get upset about this is because I know I'm in a fight that I will never see and win. Mm-hmm. But Maine's kids will. But if I quit right now, if I go, well, it's just too much, then they don't stand a fucking chance. Period. It's not a fair deal. It's not. We're never gonna see it. But this is the card I was dealt, and so I'm gonna fight while I'm here.
And you know what? To answer your question, Laurel, because like I feel like your question was genuine, right? Like sometimes people get on platforms like this and they posture. They like to start the debate, but there's no intention on ending the discussion. But I think that to answer your question and to piggyback off of what David said, we have to keep going, right? So let's say the Black Lives Matter movement. So we see how they reacted to just the slogan, right? Just the idea that Black Lives Matter. So we keep going, right? Okay, you don't like the fact that we said Black Lives Matter? Let's change how we present the exact same point so that it is acceptable and understood, and there's no way that you can maneuver around just the terminology, right? Because when we're saying Black Lives Matter, we've never said that Black lives are better than anyone. We've never said that Black lives are more important than anyone. We've never said that anyone is beneath us. We just said, hey, we matter, right? And so they take that as diminishing their position. And so we need to rephrase our position so that it is more acceptable and more easily understood and less easily manipulated, to fit another agenda, a different person's agenda. We need to be a lot better at getting involved in politics, getting involved in our communities, getting involved in school boards, getting involved in corporate partnerships, getting involved in buying and selling our own products so that we can start developing this money in our communities and start using it to enhance and improve and bring up our education platforms, our education systems. So there are things that we can do despite having the boots on our neck, despite the violent responses to Black progression that we encounter every few years, that we start climbing that ladder of success. There's still things that we can do. There's still we still need to be dedicated. We still need to be motivated to move forward, and we can't let their responses to our progression make us complacent, make us tired, make us weary. We have to keep moving forward.
Right. And we have, right? We have. But I just take a real issue with that kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of rhetoric, because I would argue that we have never had bootstraps to pull ourselves up by in the first place. Okay. Black people, yes, we need to continue to do what we need to do to get what we want in terms of, equality and equity in this country in every single form, in economics, in politics, in schools, so on and so forth, right? And just in who we get to marry, right? And where we live, all of those things, absolutely. What I'm saying is that the onus is not on Black folks living in America. The onus is on the state and the violence that the state has perpetuated on our communities, right? We bring up Malcolm and Martin, but we forget to talk about Mandela. Mandela went through it too. Were there moments where he probably wanted to quit when he was sitting up in that jail cell? Why did I even do this? What's going on? Nothing's gonna change, I'm sure. But what happened in South Africa? They reworked their constitution. Apartheid ended. They acknowledged the wrongs that they did on their Black citizens.
How did it happen?
Living in South America. In South Africa. So that has never happened here. So let's just talk about that, right? I'm not saying we're all tired, y'all. Let's just stop. It's never going to change. I would never say that, and that is not the solution. We need to continue to fight, but we have to come together to understand when we're trying to, mobilize, and how do we get better? Because, watering down our speak and how we say certain things, Black Lives Matter, or don't say defund the police, because then they're going to think you're anti-establishment or this, or no, that's what it is. We need to continue to speak up. But more importantly, these white people who call themselves allies, right? And then want to come to brunch with us and do all of this stuff. And they want to take part in Black culture and talk about Beyonce and all this. We need y'all to step up on our behalf, because we've been fighting. And as we all explain on this episode, we keep going like this, doing the same thing. We're nonviolent, or even if we're violent, but it's the same thing. Every time we take a step forward, they use violence, they use intimidation, they use oppression to push us 10 steps back. But yet here we are still doing this. So now what could the common denominator be that might change that? What might change that? And what has changed it, historically? When white people stand up and they stop just talking about that they believe everybody is equitable, everybody deserves equity, and they start going out there and voting for African-American people to be in office, and they start going out there when we're protesting and protecting us because the police officers are targeting us unfairly, right, in these protests, and we're getting arrested and we're getting murdered. That's what needs to happen, right? The onus is on the state. The onus is on whiteness.
See, I agree with you. I think that we have a fundamental difference in opinion on, so you say watering down our speech. To a point, maybe, right? Maybe we water down our speech, but it's more important. So here's what I think. I think that, and this may be dividing the country between political lines, but I think that the GOP does a great job of marketing their opinion, right? They know their target audience, and they market their opinion directly to that target audience. The thing that we have to deal with, and you brought up other like LGBT community and even different ethnicities, different cultures. There are so few of us that if the national majority is able to just keep splinters in between all of the other demographics, we'll never be able to get our traction going forward. Well, all of the minority demographics will always be doing this unless we do a better job at marketing our position. So I'm not saying that we need to water down our ideology. What I'm saying is we need to do a better job of pushing it so that the people, the white people, the allies are comfortable with backing and supporting our position. So you may consider it watering down. Maybe that's what it is, right? But in order to get the allies, the people who are in the majority, to get comfortable with supporting our position, we have to present it to them in a way that is more appetizing, is what I'm saying. Does that mean we water it down a little bit? Possibly, but we're not going to get anywhere with, standing in front of, our city capitol building, our state capitol building, the national capitol building in all black with our fists in the air. Is it a good imagery? Does it make us feel powerful? True, but it also further divides the people who are in power and who are in the majority from the people who need representation. And so, to David's point, when we were discussing the Constitution, we have to start marketing our position so that we can get people in the door. And then once people are in the door, they can start developing policies, developing legislation, moving us forward. It may be 1 or 2 steps at a time. So you say every time we progress forward, they send us 10 steps back. So we just need to be able to get 11 steps forward. Maybe we don't need to jump 50 steps forward and get total equality today, right? We get 11 steps forward so that when we get pushed 10 steps back, we still made progress. We still made 1% progress. And maybe this is something that, I'm with David. I'm 40 plus years old. This is probably something that we're not going to see in our lifetimes. Maybe not even you, Laurel. And, we got you by a decade or so. But, maybe my 4-year-old son will grow up in a society where, he is seen as equal to the majority of the country. And so that's why I keep pressing forward. That's why I decided to come on board a platform like this. That's why I decide to talk about these very, very important topics, because it doesn't really happen in Black houses. Black houses, we like to complain about a lot of shit, but we don't talk about, okay, these are the steps. These are the things that are important to propelling us forward and progressing in this society. So we need to do a better job of that as well.
I just want to add to your point when you said about it's not going to inspire white people to be meaningful allies when they see, Black folks looking militant, standing with their fists up. And I hear you, but I think that that's not a very common occurrence, right? 9 times out of 10, what that looks like is after school programs, right? It looks like Black people stepping up for their communities and providing free breakfast, transportation to kids, educational things like podcasts and different things like that. That's what it looks like. But for some reason, white people, they'll listen to it because they don't want to be put in that category, right? When the insurrection happened, there was a whole bunch of people on my social media. I'm not one of those white people. So please, Laurel, don't say anything. What do you mean you're not one of those white people? Yes, you are. You are part of a system that has been constructed, this construct of whiteness, right? Where, as I stated before, and we all kind of agree on, when we ask to be given equality, when we ask that, okay, you're here, we're here. We're just asking that you stop pushing us down and let us come up here. That's it. We're not even going to bother you. They don't see that as, oh, okay. They see that as, so you are trying to go like this. Right. And you are trying to raise up and do to us what we have done to you.
Right.
So, it's just very difficult for that group of individuals to grasp onto that when in your mind, you are inherently protecting your whiteness, your privilege.
Which is why it's important that we present our position in a more palatable manner to them, right? So like you said, they don't see the after school programs. They don't see the community outreach programs. They don't see the home ownership programs and the community building programs, right? They don't see that. Why? Because the owners of the media companies are guys who grew up in the Jim Crow era. And to them, it is more valuable to them to show the thugs on the corner, to show the people who are fighting in the clubs, to show the people who are resisting arrest, right? So they have the power to present us in the way that they want us to be presented to the rest of the majority of the population, right? So we need to do a better job of not putting ourselves in those positions, in those predicaments, so that they can't put us on display like that, right? So there's been a history of putting African-American people on display. We are entertainment pieces, right? And so we cannot keep putting ourselves in the position to be exploited as entertainment pieces. And that's just one of the small different cogs on the gears and the wheels of us moving forward and progressing. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying we need to water ourselves down. I'm saying we need to put ourselves in better presentation.
I hear that. I hear that. But David, I just want to say quickly, it's just that like my dad always says, right, and he's old school, right, and he's one of those people who remembers segregation in Boston and different things like that, right? So I grew up in a household learning about those kind of things. But there's always one fly in the ointment, right? And there's also this kind of notion that I think we have a lot in our community that everybody needs to be on the same page. Right? Like when we talk about the hip hop culture and different things where you see, whoa, Black people, dry humping people on stage, or they're doing this. You're making us all look bad when we're trying to push this Black agenda to, not everybody's an activist. That's just what it is at the end of the day. Do I believe that we need to, represent ourselves in a more positive way? Yes. But not everybody's an activist. And also, as you stated, right, if white people and people who are racist are controlling the media, then even if we're all on the up and up as a community as a whole, doing whatever is, and again, this is a sticky conversation because what's deemed to be correct or positive behavior, I would, argue is probably problematic and has some kind of a white core to it somewhere. Even if we do all of the things that we should be doing, they will find a way to spin it. They will find a way to make it negative. So I just wanted to add that. Go ahead, David.
They'll find a way, but like to Maine's point about like how the narrative gets across, right? I'll take defund the police, right? So if you say that statement, right, with no context, right, then there's so many ways you can take that, right? Like, and somebody could say, well, no, defund the police because they've got all this funding, almost militarized. Like, why do they need all that? They're like, but okay, some person hears that. Another person hears defund the police is like, you're trying to get rid of my police department that protects my private. But like, what exactly does that mean? Like, the message has to be very clear, succinct, because if not, it will get spun. Defund the police got turned into, they want to get rid of all police. They want to come for your homes. They want to do, it's like, nobody fucking said that at all. Like, nobody ever said that. But like, if that's the market message you decide to go with, right? They will spin it. Like the GOP showed us they are masters at that bullshit, right? This is propaganda at its best, right? So again, you gotta know the enemy that you're walking into, right? Like, and I don't know. I guess for me, it's like, I look at whether it's fair or whether it's right. Yes, I do. But I just, it's been built in me, in my family and the way I am. I was like, it doesn't fucking matter. Like, is it fair? Nope. But I'm gonna do it anyway, right? Because why not, right? Like, I could tell you, like, I always take all of it as, and this is just me personally. I don't expect everybody to have this, but this is how it was, and I'll end it on this, right? So I talked about, I was in the GATE classes, gifted in talent, whatever the hell it was, and I competed in academic decathlons. And actually, I'm gonna talk to my mom. Let's see if she still remembers the story, but I went to, don't even ask me how old I was, but I remember going to the academic decathlon. My thing was reading, my thing was math. We do it at the end of the day. We go through the whole day. We finished. They're giving out the awards, right? I took, I think, like 3rd place overall, but like 1st place in reading, 1st place in math, right? So I'm supposed to come up there and get my 3 medals. We're in this nice little auditorium, right? They set the stage up. They're bringing the kids on there. Like, it's a big, huge celebration. Parents are clapping, right? There's 2 Black people in the entire fucking auditorium, me and my mom. So they call my name, right? David Lee. I walk up there, making a long walk, go to get my medal. Nice lightweight white lady looks at me and goes, "What's your name?" And I was like, "David Lee." She looks at me and she goes, what did you say your name was again? And I was like, "David Lee." She was like, okay, I just want to make sure I heard you. And she calls over her boss or whatever, stuff like that. They're going through it. And so then the lady then bends down, looks at me in this nice little Karen voice. It's not very nice to take other people's medals. People work really hard on that, right? And I'm pretty sure that you did a great job, but you should really. So at this point, mom's in the back going into mom mode, like, what's going on? So mom walks up there, asks, what's going on? Like, my son's name was called. He's coming to get his medal. She was like, who's your son? Let's look around. A little Black boy in front of you. It's only 2 of us in the whole goddamn auditorium. So at that point, my mom starts explaining to them they asked my mom for some kind of identification. Do you have his like social security number card, stuff like that, or whatever? Done. My mom lost it. Just, it's over, right? Fucking loses it. Now at this point, this whole time, like our coach or whatever, like our sponsor or whatever from our school or whatever, she wasn't there. She wasn't in the room. She was late kind of getting there. So she gets there, she sees us up on stage. She comes up, she goes, what's going on? Right? And, you know, my mom starts explaining what's going on, stuff like that or whatever. Our sponsor, white lady, loses her shit. She was like, here's our entire roster. This is this, that, or whatever. This is outrageous. You know how Karens do. So I'm watching like two Karens battling out, right? One on my behalf, the one on the other. So it's this whole incident. Finally, like the head of the little thing, the head of the little decathlon comes over, tells me to take stage. He's like, all right, we don't want to mess with whatever. And they just profusely apologize for the rest of the day. My mom's pissed. She's like, whatever. Like, we about to go home. I was like, I'm good. I got my medals. We going to Sizzler. Look, that was the thing. So I was like, I'm straight. All I wanted was my medal so I could prove we can go to Sizzler. But that whole thing for me kind of, you know, I took that as, okay, you don't think I can. Cool. Right. And so I always take that as, all right, then I took 3rd overall. Next one I'm coming for all of it.
First, yeah.
Like I'm coming for all of it. It's how I'm built. Like that's literally what I did. The next, I came for all, I swept every fucking category. To where they saw my name so many times, they just told me, just stay on stage. And that has driven me my entire life, my entire career. I don't care about challenge. I don't care what you think. I have white fathers threatening me at 9 years old, like when they saw I was in this school, like if I see you around, okay, right? That's what it's gonna be. Like I've known it was always gonna be stacked against me. Cool. Then I'm gonna roll with it, right? Because if I do, right, then that puts me in, and I know that I can succeed, right? And to your point earlier that we kind of talked about off screen, I had enough, whatever you want to call it, early success or examples where I can say, okay, if I do this hard enough, I can get to this point, I can get to this point. It didn't make it any better, right? They still looked at me differently. That's cool. But I'm petty at the end of the day. So I can stand there and look at him and be like, I'm going to just watch you piss the fuck off, right? And I might date your girl afterwards too, just because I want to see you pissed off, right? But I'm petty, right? And that pettiness drives everything else because I knew, like, if I continue to put myself in these positions, then at the time, like my nieces, my nephews, they won't have to deal with that shit because I'll be in a position to make sure that I can help them not get through that. And to me, that's what it's all about. It's about progressing just enough to make it easier for another generation to be better, right? And then turn around and doing the same thing. Now you can do something to be better. To me, it's about progress. And I look at it, I've always had a long-term game. If we compare today to where it was just when my fucking mother was growing up, right? When she was afraid if her little brother would make it home from school because motherfuckers in Illinois trying to go kill him, right? Like that. So to that instance, to go back to where they used to turn the fucking fire hoses on the sick dogs on us, right? To an extent, like, is that brutality still there? Yes. Is it in the droves that we saw then? No. And that took 60, 70 years, right? Yes, it's a slow fucking grind. And like areas where we can accelerate, you best believe I'm going to be all for it. But I know, and I've known for a while now, that this is a long-term game that we got to play, right? And the biggest thing that we can do is numbers, right? If the more of us that are there, the more of us in a room, I look at it in corporations when I walk in, the more people that I can get looking like me that are in these positions that I can bring to the executive leadership. So they're having these conversations so they understand how these people talk, how they move, and you can be in those decisions. Then we can actually start making change. But it's somebody's got to fucking go, and we got to go through shit to get there. Like, and that's the thing that I'm just like, but that's how I'm built. And I get that. And so part of, all of this stuff that we kind of put together is so people can, whatever, argue, whatever. I don't give a shit, but at least you're talking about it, right? Yo, you can jump in the comments like, Dave's it is, Dave's that. Cool, great. Guess what? You're talking about it, right? It's making you think about it. Great. Now go fucking do something about it. Fuck, go prove me wrong. Shit. Say, nah, Dave, we need to blow all this shit up and we can do that. Cool, great. Go do it. Like, like, if it makes a change, I'm cool. Like, if I walked into a room and 10,000 black people was like, yo, we just set up arms, just blow this whole shit up. Let's go. Fuck it. All right, I'm with it. Right? Like, I'm just be in the fight. That's my biggest thing. Just be in the fight. If you're fighting, I'm with you. That's it. If you're hiding, I'm with you. I promise you. right? But it's just I don't. I know the odds are stacked, right? And I guess I look at it as like I know that it matters. So I need to understand the context, but it doesn't matter because it's not gonna stop how hard I'm gonna fight. Like it really doesn't, right? Because like I look at y'all two like you're worth it. Maine's worth it. Laurel, you're worth it, right? So fuck you. I mean, like I can't look at y'all and be like, well, all this shit going, damn, it's a lot. Oh well, Laurel's worth it. Maine's worth it. Quay, as much man, Quay's worth it. Brooklyn, they're worth it. So at the end, it doesn't matter because I can rest easy at whatever time I leave this earth and know that I fought, right? I put everything into it. I fought and I made it that much better. I made it easier for my nephew. I definitely know that. I made it easier for him. Cool. And there's more that I can make it easy for. So
I just wanted to say that, you know, with that story that you shared with us, and thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm not surprised, because as Karens do. I mean, what do you expect? That's their thing. Yeah. But I am fighting, right, for a world amongst many things, right? But I'm fighting for my future children to live in a society where they do not have to do necessarily what you did, David, where they had to work 10 times harder than the other white kids that were a part of that academic decathlon or whatever, just because they're Black. Working harder, not to prove, you know, not to necessarily get the trophy, but to prove that I'm worthy, that I'm here, that I deserve to be treated like a human being with respect and with human rights. That's what I'm fighting for. So the route that I'm always looking for is, where do we get to abolishing that place where that Karen saw your name and probably thought it was somebody that was Asian, or must have been somebody white, because who is this Black kid? How could he have gotten this far? That's not because of her racism, right? And her racism and things like that projected onto you, that changed the trajectory of the way that you viewed yourself and in your work ethic. That to you sounds like it works for you, but to others, I know for myself, having experienced similar things, it's been harmful. Yeah. So I'm trying to attack it at that root right there.
Yeah. Go ahead. And I was just going to say, and you brought up the way that Karens respond, and it's not just Karens, right? It's really any white people in a position of power when they see Black people excelling in something that they didn't think Black people should be able to excel at. They just have this way of, you know, just taking little shots. Just like how she did. Oh, let me look at the list. Okay, now it's time to make a spectacle. Let me bring this person in. Let me bring this person in. Let me stifle your achievement as much as possible publicly, because then you grow up, you know, not everyone is as resilient as you and I and Laurel are, right? So some people, they see that at, you know, 8, 9 years old, they experience that and that crushes them. That takes all the fight out of them that early. Some people are in college, some people are, you know, in corporate America, and it still happens, you know, even in corporate America. And, you know, at 25, 35 years old, you know, eventually you hit that point where it just crushes you and it takes the fight out of you. So we've historically been a resilient ass culture. We have endured so much over the last 400 years in this country. Our culture should not be here. And not only are we here, but we're thriving and we're running shit and we're breaking records and we're achieving goals and numbers that we have never historically been able to do before. And even though we are that resilient as a culture, sometimes this shit will break you. And we need to have the next generations in line so that when I'm 70 years old and I can't do it anymore, I know that Brooklyn and Kyrie and Quay behind me are equipped to continue doing it. You know what I'm saying? And if you have the kids, that little Elijah, when he comes around, you know, he is equipped to continue the fight, because we're going to have to. Like David said, man, in the last 60 years, you know, my mom was in North Carolina when dogs were being sicked on, you know, 6-year-old little girls going to second grade. You know what I'm saying? Like, my mom lived that shit. And here we are in 2020, 2021, where we have people storming the fucking capital of the country over these same ideologies. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, it's been 60 years. It's been 70 years that this shit has on paper been abolished. But in practice, that shit happens to Black people every single day. And so we just need to continue to build up the strength and the knowledge and the motivation and the ability and the resiliency in our culture to continue the fight, because they are not relenting. They see any progress anywhere else as a threat on their way of life. And maybe it is. Maybe it should be. But we cannot relent, even if it takes another 70 years. We can't do it.
And we also need to hold the white folks in our lives accountable, right? People who care about us and care about, and maybe they do their work, right? Maybe they're reading Baldwin and they're out here and they're on the streets with us, and love that for y'all. Thank you. But, you know, I need you to come with this same energy when you're in the rooms that I'm not allowed into because I'm Black and because I'm a woman. I need you to come with that. That's when we're really going to start to see this ball rolling in a way that we've never seen it rolling before.
Yeah. And that harkens back to what I was saying earlier, how, like, even though the Jim Crow laws were meant to stifle us, they were meant to stifle our allies too. And they still feel it. So yeah, they need to come with that energy, but we need to make it easy. You know, we need to make it easy for them to bring those arguments to the tables in those rooms that we don't have access to.
Yep. That's it. Take us out, man.
All right. Yeah, this was a good one. This was a good ass episode, man. I love having these discussions. Laurel, I love that you came on board as the third host of this podcast, because you bring this energy that have people in the DMs and on the Instagram and on the Facebooks leaving video messages. So keep bringing that heat.
Stay on my DMs. I'm good.
They can hit the
ask me a question about what we talked about. Leave me alone.
Nah, they can hit the Ebony Ascent DM. So yeah, as always, please come interact, come ask the questions, come comment on the topics. Hit us up, ebonyascent.com. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube. And now you can find us on Twitter at Ebony Ascent. And then you can find us on TikTok at the On the Corner Media Group. So yeah, this has been a great ass episode. Thank you guys for coming out. Thank you guys for bringing this passion and bringing this knowledge and just bringing this energy that Black people need to see other Black people have for inspiring us to progress the culture. So until the next cocktail, until the next conversation, we out of here.
Y'all stay safe out there.